All right, so let's see. I don't know where we left off. My camera freaked out and turned off, but I turned it back on. I think we were talking about Article 3, judicial branch. And moving on, let's just move on to Article 4. And I'll tell you what, if there's any article of the Constitution that you should look into, it is Article 4. And basically, Article 4 talks about federal and state relations. So if you are a huge fan of putting on those 18th century glasses, or you don't have the ability to do that, then look at Article 4. That outlines federal and state relations, and that is going to blow your mind. Seriously, give it some time. It's almost like saying that Canada, Mexico, and the United States are going to join in a federal union, and we are going to come up with our own flag. And basically that group is going to be the supreme power of all of the countries / states in the Union, much like the European Union or something like that. Now imagine if that got proposed today. Hey, guess what, Americans? We're going to join in a union with Canada and Mexico, and we're going to call ourselves the United States of North America. Would you dig it? Probably not. So keep in mind, that's pretty much what the Constitutional Convention was asking of the average American citizen. Guess what? We're going to join in this huge, we're going to call it the United States of America. It's going to go everywhere from, Vermont all the way down to Georgia and whatnot. All over, all 13 are going to be combined. And, that was kind of a hard idea to sell. I mean, think about it. If you're one of the founding fathers, or you are lobbying for money for the Continental Army or whatnot, fighting the most powerful military entity in the world at that time, how hard do you think it was to sell that message? So, kind of think about that as you're looking at Article 4. I urge you to look at that. Article 5 talks about amendments, and basically, Article 5 is the amendments. And it talks about how we amend the Constitution, what has to be done, and basically how that process goes about. And you'll see a couple of years after ratification, they utilize Article 5 quite extensively, 10 times, all in one sitting to be exact, which is kind of bringing me to the Bill of Rights if you are asleep at the wheel. Anyway, Article 6 kind of goes around the federal government, how it's going to work, kind of specifics about it. Somewhat interesting, but Article 4 is my favorite. Anyway, Article 7 talks about ratification, which nowadays doesn't really matter as much to us because it's already been ratified, but that was basically what I call the hater blocker article, blocking the hate of the people, such as the anti-federalists that did not want to engage in a treaty. That's like if you were against Canada and Mexico and the United States making the United Countries of North America, you would probably be what they back then called an anti-federalist. So, just some historical context for you. Anyway, now we get on to the Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights is very interesting to me for many reasons, and one of which is because the United States just beat Great Britain in one of the craziest wars ever fought, where there was no chance of success, but somehow it happened thanks to France and some other international support. But before it happened, there was a lot of abuses going on. Of course, like I said, you can go back to the Independence, Declaration of Independence, look at all the grievances that we had with the Crown. And basically, the Founding Fathers had a really bad taste in their mouth. Actually, they were pretty pissed. And they still remembered very vividly the abuses and the things that King George and the Crown did that really just pissed them off. So the Bill of Rights, there was a huge debate whether they should actually have a Bill of Rights, and actually someone like Thomas Jefferson, who I don't know if you can tell yet, was my favorite founding father, he was actually against the Bill of Rights initially, really against it. And his thought process was, if we enumerate a list of rights that every citizen has, maybe we're going to forget a couple, and maybe the federal government someday will be so strong that they will look at that list and they will honor the list, but then they will find every little tiny thing that is not on the list and basically abuse the hell out of it. And people who argued for the adoption of the Bill of Rights we're saying, no, that's not going to happen. What we need to do is we need to list the rights that every citizen has. These unalienable natural rights that we were talking about in the Declaration and the preamble and whatnot, we need to enumerate those. We need to make them known so the government has, can back off. And some people were saying, well, the government has such a big, responsible job, a huge burden, a huge job they have to do. Why are we going to limit, we're going to set the government up for failure. We're going to make them have to do all these things that we just talked about in all 7 articles, or 6 articles, I should say. And then, basically, we're going to limit them from doing it. It's basically like you tell somebody you're going to mow the lawn, but you can't use a lawnmower, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. So they were like, well, what's the point? If we're going to limit the federal government, why are we even going to do this? So there was many thoughts going back and forth. Ultimately, there was 3 states that kind of pushed the decision. New York, Massachusetts, and Virginia, if I remember right, basically said we are not going to ratify the Constitution if there is no promise of a Bill of Rights. So if we're even going to do this, we demand a Bill of Rights to be done. And that goes back to, historically, New York at the time was a hotbed of anti-federalism. So was Virginia, which is where Mr. Jefferson comes from, if you know your history. And if you haven't gone to Monticello, which is his house, which was amazing, you should go. Anyway, moving on. So basically they decided to, now keep in mind, the Constitution was ratified and then the Bill of Rights came out several years later. So, if you actually look at it, it's kind of a giant leap of faith. Kind of is really an understatement. It was a huge leap of faith. The states, especially New York, Massachusetts, and Virginia, that was a huge leap of faith that they were going to ratify this big, overwhelming federal agreement, and hopefully that Madison and the other founding fathers would have their back when it came time to cash in and pay up for, putting in the Bill of Rights. So anyway, moving down the list, there's a couple things within the Bill of Rights, and of course there's 10, and they were all basically done at the same time. And let me grab I do have my phone up, and let me make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, so the First Amendment is what we call the Establishment Clause, which is huge in religion and whatnot. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, assembly, the right to petition and peaceably assemble. To petition the government. Basically, that comes from the fact that they were petitioning the crown and they were getting penalized for it. They had a nightmare scenario like the Boston Massacre and whatnot happening when people were trying to petition the government, and they had a lot of issues with the crown. So they want, first and foremost, they wanted you to be able to practice whatever religion you wanted. At the end of the day, that's where the settlers and the pilgrims came over here for, was religious independence, amongst many other motives. But they also wanted you to be able to seek redress from your government peacefully and not have to worry about your door getting busted in and you're getting thrown in some jail ship or prison ship or executed somewhere or taken away, much like what the British were doing. Moving on, Second Amendment. Hey, this may or may not be my favorite amendment. In fact, it is. And I'm doing a whole other video on the Second Amendment. But I like this amendment because, and actually it's very interesting how this is worded. Now again, you got to keep those 18th century glasses on, because if you read the Second Amendment with 21st century glasses on, you're going to look at it and be like, wait, what did that say? Does this mean that we have the right to own a gun? What is this? But if you look back on the 18th century, and especially if you look at the Federalist Papers, you look at George Washington's individual quotes and whatnot, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I'm going to make another video for it. But basically, they strongly supported the right of every American to have guns. And that was for good reason. It wasn't for hunting. It wasn't for competitive shooting. And I hate seeing all these, congressmen and politicians saying, well, why do you need that to go hunting? Why do you need that to do competition shooting? It's like, dude, we don't have, the Second Amendment is not there to go shooting on the weekends or go hunting. The Second Amendment is there so I can protect myself from you. So, anyway, moving on. Third Amendment is basically the quartering amendment. So the government cannot quarter troops in your houses. They were having huge problems with that. The British Army would just show up at their houses during drills or training, or they'd be on the move, especially Lexington and Concord, it happened. They would basically show up at your house and say, guess what? You're going to be feeding 20 of the king's soldiers tonight. Have fun. And you have to put them up, and you're going to have to go sleep in the farm so the British soldiers, His Majesty's soldiers, can have indoor places to stay. So you think that would that piss you off a little bit? Yeah, that would piss me off a lot. So they didn't forget about that, King George, and they put that in as the Third Amendment. Moving on, Fourth Amendment. I think that's the unreasonable search and seizures, which in modern day terms requires a search warrant when you're looking through vehicle, person, property, house, anything like that. And you can't just have the police knock in your door or blow down your door, just show up and search whatever they want. You can't be walking down the street and all of a sudden a policeman is going to molest your items or search your things, or basically there's a whole bunch of other provisions. It's been expanded with the Miranda rights and a bunch of other things. But moving on, Fifth Amendment is the right of you to not act as a witness against yourself. Mr. Second Amendment, what the hell does that mean? That means that if you committed a crime, let's say, or you're on trial for something that you supposedly might have done, or you're a suspect in something, you do not have to bear witness against yourself, which means you do not have to confess. And you actually don't even, in the modern version with the Miranda rights and everything, that's where it comes from. If you've ever watched Cops, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in the court of law. That's where it comes from. You have rights. You don't have to. If you've done something wrong, you are innocent until proven guilty. So place the burden of proof on the state, because that's where it rests. You don't have to act as your own witness against yourself. So moving on. You have the right to trial by jury, and you can confront the accuser. You have a public trial and the right to counsel. So basically, if you are in hot water, or you're accused of something, or you've done something wrong, or they suspect that you've done something wrong, essentially you have the right to have legal counsel, someone to represent you. You have the right to a trial. Basically, King George his men were showing up. Hey, you did that. And they would take him away, and you would either never see that guy again, or he would sit or rot in a prison ship for an eternity. So, of course, the Founding Fathers wanted to stamp that out. They didn't want people, that's where habeas corpus also comes into play. And you history majors out there will realize that came under attack with Mr. Lincoln. But a wartime trend in the United States is, as we progress through war, our rights get shrinkened. Historically speaking, if you look at it, that's kind of what happens. Anyway, I'm moving on. Let's see. Need my little phone out here. Seventh Amendment, civil trial by jury. That's civil suits and whatnot. Eighth Amendment is they can't do excessive bail or cruel and unusual punishment. Basically, torturing, corporal punishment, anything to force a confession or anything out of you can't be done, and it should not be done. And even today, there's some debate, chain gangs and stuff like that. Is that cruel and unusual punishment? And the debate moves on. It's still going on. So, moving down my list. The Ninth Amendment is basically, this is the enumeration amendment. This is perhaps, besides the Second Amendment, in my opinion, this is just Mr. Second Amendment here. Besides the Second Amendment, the Ninth Amendment is one of the most important amendments, probably the second most, because that enumerates all of, it basically says, and this is the compromise, this is the good old American tradition of compromising, it basically says, just because we've listed these rights in the Bill of Rights, the prior 8 rights, does not mean that those are the only rights that all citizens are guaranteed to have. Basically, this enumerates all of the rights that are not listed here. So there may or may not be rights out there that we did not list. So that kind of puts the government kind of walking on eggshells, kind of makes it, the federal government just can't freely do whatever it wants outside of the first 8 amendments, because the 9th says, well, guess what? There's rights that may or may not be enumerated here. And then Amendment 10, which would probably be in more recent times, was Chicago, McDonald v. Chicago, Heller versus D.C., which is the prior case to that, 2 years earlier. This is where the 10th Amendment is kind of key here, and it talks about that the rights go to the states as well. And the Supreme Court has used these amendments to make many rulings all over the place with judicial review. So anyway, that was a very long video. I'm going to cap it off right now, of your Constitution. If there's anything that I can stress, it is know your Constitution, know how it was made, know who your founding fathers are, know what they stood for, and read your damn Constitution. You should know what it says. There's no excuse for you to walk around and be an uneducated American. Or if you're a citizen of a different country, whatever Constitution you have, you, by being part of the social contract, you being a part of this society, you should know. You should know what is in your Constitution. So, the Garand is back together. This video is over with. And that's a clean rifle right there. And you should know your Constitution. So hopefully this helped. Hopefully this will be the spark that ignites the fire. But I want you to go out there. I want you to read your Constitution. I carry a copy with me everywhere I go. And I read it every now and then to get back up on it. But know your Constitution. So thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this was worthwhile. Hopefully this helped you out. And, get out, learn. As Thomas Jefferson said, basically, if you're uneducated, you're a slave. Know your Constitution. All right, Mr. Second Amendment, signing off. Thank you.